I found Karen standing in my kitchen screaming about illegal trespassers when I arrived at my newly purchased abandoned island house. She claimed the island was self-governing and threatened to run me off like 6 previous owners. 4 years federal prison later, my Victorian restoration won House of the Year. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. The woman was standing in my kitchen when I arrived at my newly purchased island house, screaming into her phone about trespassers and illegal occupation. She had no idea she was about to be arrested for breaking into private property. I was carrying my first load of supplies up from the dock when I heard shouting coming from inside the 1890s Victorian house I just bought for $85,000 at auction. The front door was wide open, and a woman's voice was echoing through the empty rooms like she owned the place. "I don't care what some piece of paper says," she was yelling into her phone. "This house has been abandoned for 20 years, and we're not letting some outsider destroy our island's character with their renovation project." I set down my boxes and walked through my own front door to find a middle-aged woman in expensive hiking gear standing in what used to be the kitchen, surrounded by 3 other people who were clearly following her lead. "Excuse me," I said, my voice echoing in the empty house. "You're trespassing on private property." The woman spun around with the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from years of never being challenged. "I'm Linda Hayes, president of Whispering Pines Island Community Association. This house is a historic landmark that cannot be privately owned." I looked around at the house I'd spent 6 months researching, bidding on, and legally purchasing through proper channels. "Ma'am, I have the deed, the insurance, and the renovation permits. This is my house." "That's impossible," she snapped, gesturing at the peeling wallpaper and broken windows. "This property was abandoned decades ago. The island community has been maintaining it as a historic site." "Maintaining it?" I repeated, looking at the obvious neglect and decay around us. "By letting it fall apart?" "By preserving its historical integrity," Linda declared. "And we will not allow some mainlander to turn our island treasure into a modern eyesore." That's when I realized Linda Hayes had no idea what she was walking into. "Ma'am, you need to leave my property immediately." "Your property?" She laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "This island operates by community consensus, not some capitalist property grab. We decide what happens to significant buildings. The county clerk who sold me this house might disagree with that." "County authorities have no jurisdiction over island community decisions," Linda replied with absolute confidence. "We've been self-governing for 30 years. I pulled out my phone and made the call that would change everything. "Sheriff's Department, Deputy Johnson speaking." "Deputy Johnson, this is Marcus Thompson. I need assistance with trespassers at 47 Lighthouse Road on Whispering Pines Island. Several people have broken into my house and are refusing to leave." Linda's confident expression flickered. "Sheriff's Department? They claim the island is self-governing and that county authorities have no jurisdiction," I continued into the phone. "Sir, we'll have a boat over there within the hour. Don't engage with the trespassers." After I hung up, Linda stepped closer with her finger pointed at my chest. "You just made a huge mistake. This island takes care of its own problems and you're about to become one. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you that mainlanders who don't respect island traditions don't last long here." One of her companions, a bearded man in a flannel shirt, stepped forward. "Linda's right. We've run off 6 outsiders who tried to change island character. You'll be number 7. "How exactly do you run off property owners?" Linda smiled with the kind of malice that made my skin crawl. "Accidents happen on islands. Boats develop problems. Supplies get delayed. People discover that island living isn't as romantic as they imagined. That sounds like criminal harassment." "That sounds like community self-defense," she replied. "And if you're smart, you'll sell this house back to the community at cost and leave before things get unpleasant." That's when I decided Linda Hayes needed to learn about property law and criminal trespassing the hard way. "Ms. Hayes, I'm going to explain something very clearly. This is private property that I purchased legally. You are trespassing and your threats constitute criminal harassment. Leave now or explain your actions to the sheriff." "The sheriff has no authority here," Linda insisted. "Island disputes are handled by island justice." "Island justice?" I repeated. "What exactly does that mean?" The bearded man grinned unpleasantly. "It means accidents, vandalism, equipment failures, insurance problems. People who don't fit in tend to leave quickly." I was processing the fact that these people had just confessed to systematic harassment and property destruction when the sound of boat engines cut through the morning air. "That'll be the sheriff," I said, watching Linda's confidence start to crack. They can't arrest us for protecting island heritage, she declared, but her voice was getting shaky. They can arrest you for breaking into my house and threatening property destruction. The sheriff's boat arrived with 2 deputies who clearly knew the island's reputation. Deputy Johnson stepped onto my dock like he'd done this before. Mr. Thompson? I'm Deputy Johnson. Where are the trespassers? Inside my house, Deputy. They claim the island is self-governing and that you have no jurisdiction here. Deputy Johnson's expression hardened. We get that claim about twice a year. It's always wrong. We walked up to the house where Linda and her companions were waiting in the kitchen like they were hosting a dinner party instead of conducting a home invasion. Ma'am, I'm Deputy Johnson with the County Sheriff's Department. Mr. Thompson reports that you're trespassing on his property. This house belongs to the island community, Linda declared. We have historical preservation rights that supersede individual ownership. Deputy Johnson pulled out his notepad. Could I see those rights? The legal documents establishing community ownership. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. We don't need documents. This island has been self-governing for decades. Ma'am, this is county jurisdiction. We need to see legal proof of your authority or you're trespassing on private property. The Island Community Association decides. Has no legal authority over private property, Deputy Johnson interrupted. Mr. Thompson, do you have proof of ownership? I handed him my deed, purchase agreement, and insurance documents. After examining them, he nodded. Ma'am, you're trespassing on legally owned private property. You need to leave immediately. But Linda wasn't finished destroying her own credibility. Officer, this man is an outsider trying to destroy island character. The community has protected this house for 20 years. By letting it fall apart? Deputy Johnson asked, looking around at the obvious neglect. By preserving its historical integrity, Linda insisted. Ma'am, abandoning a building isn't preservation. And threatening property owners is criminal harassment. The bearded man stepped forward aggressively. You mainlanders don't understand island ways. We handle our own problems. By threatening property destruction and harassment? Deputy Johnson asked. Because that's what Mr. Thompson reported. We were just explaining island traditions, Linda said weakly. The tradition of running off 6 previous property owners through accidents and vandalism? I asked. Deputy Johnson's expression turned ice cold. Ma'am, did you threaten property destruction and harassment? I explained that people who don't fit island culture tend to leave, Linda replied. Through accidents, equipment failures, and insurance problems? Deputy Johnson continued, reading from his notes. That sounds like confession to criminal conspiracy. The silence that followed was beautiful. Linda realized she'd confessed to years of criminal harassment in front of a law enforcement officer. We were just trying to preserve island character, she whispered. By committing crimes against property owners, Deputy Johnson said, pulling out his handcuffs. Linda Hayes, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, conspiracy to commit property destruction, and harassment under color of authority. You can't arrest me, Linda protested as the handcuffs clicked shut. I'm protecting this island's heritage. You're confessing to criminal conspiracy against 6 previous property owners. As they loaded Linda and her companions into the sheriff's boat, she screamed one last threat. This island will never accept you. We'll make your life hell until you leave. Ma'am, Deputy Johnson called back, threatening continued harassment from jail is not helping your case. After the boat left, I stood alone in my house for the first time since purchasing it. The silence was peaceful until my phone rang. Mr. Thompson? This is Detective Martinez with the County Criminal Investigation Division. We need to discuss the harassment campaign you reported. What harassment campaign? The systematic intimidation of 6 previous property owners on Whispering Pines Island. We've been investigating reports of coordinated vandalism and harassment, but victims always left before we could build cases. Linda Hayes confessed to running off 6 outsiders through accidents and property destruction. She confessed? To a deputy? While trespassing in my house. It's all in his report. Mr. Thompson, this is exactly the evidence we needed. Can you come in tomorrow to give a detailed statement? The investigation that followed revealed the scope of Linda's criminal enterprise. Over 15 years, the Island Community Association had systematically harassed property owners through vandalism, supply sabotage, equipment destruction, and intimidation campaigns. They'd cost previous owners hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damage and forced 6 families to abandon legitimate property purchases. The evidence was overwhelming: security camera footage of vandalism, insurance claims for mysterious property damage, and detailed records of coordinated harassment campaigns. But the most damning evidence came from Linda's own records. She'd kept detailed files on each outsider they'd driven away, complete with strategies for harassment and timelines for property destruction. Linda had documented her own crimes for 15 years. The federal investigation began when authorities discovered that sabotaging boats and interfering with mail delivery constituted federal crimes. The island's isolation had made Linda think she was beyond law enforcement reach, but federal jurisdiction doesn't end at the waterline. Linda Hayes was ultimately charged with 15 federal crimes including mail tampering, interference with commerce, conspiracy, and racketeering under the organized crime statutes. Her trial was a sensation in maritime law circles. The island queen who'd terrorized property owners for decades was finally facing justice for her criminal enterprise. The evidence was so overwhelming that Linda's lawyer advised immediate plea bargaining. She ultimately pled guilty to 7 federal felonies and received 4 years in federal prison plus restitution of $340,000 to victims. But the real justice came when the island community discovered what Linda had actually been doing. Most residents had no idea about the systematic harassment campaign and were horrified to learn their community association was actually a criminal organization. The emergency community meeting was brutal. Residents who'd supported Linda's preservation efforts learned they'd been unwitting accessories to 15 years of criminal harassment. She told us she was protecting island character, one elderly resident said in shock. We had no idea she was committing crimes. 6 families lost their homes because of her harassment, another resident replied angrily. We're lucky the federal government didn't prosecute the entire community. The Real Community Association that formed after Linda's arrest was everything the island needed. Focused on actual historic preservation, welcoming to new residents, and committed to following the law. They offered to help with my renovation project as a way of apologizing for Linda's crimes. 1 year later, I was sitting on the restored wraparound porch of my beautiful Victorian house, watching the sunset paint the water gold and orange. The renovation had taken 8 months, but the result was everything I'd envisioned when I first saw the property. The house was magnificent: original hardwood floors, restored stained glass windows, and modern amenities that honored the 1890s architecture. It was listed on the National Historic Register as a properly preserved example of Victorian maritime architecture. My phone buzzed with a text from the new Community Association president. The island newsletter featured your house as Restoration of the Year. Thank you for showing us how to properly preserve our heritage. The island community had transformed completely. New families were buying property and restoring historic buildings with community support. Property values had increased 40% as people discovered that welcoming newcomers was better for preservation than harassing them. Linda's criminal campaign had actually damaged historic preservation by driving away people with resources and expertise to properly restore island heritage. The federal restitution money had funded a community preservation fund that helped longtime residents maintain their historic properties. Linda's crimes had accidentally created the resources for legitimate preservation. 6 months after Linda's sentencing, I received a letter forwarded from the federal prison where she was serving her sentence. Mr. Thompson, I realize now that my methods were wrong. The island needed preservation, but not through harassment and crime. I hope you can restore the house properly and that the island community can support legitimate preservation efforts. It was signed Linda Hayes, federal prisoner number 4847293. I filed the letter with the rest of the case documents and went back to enjoying my coffee on the porch Linda had tried to prevent me from restoring. The house was perfect: Victorian elegance with modern convenience, historic character with contemporary comfort. Tourists came regularly to photograph the island's crown jewel restoration project. The irony was beautiful. Linda had tried to preserve the house by keeping it abandoned and deteriorating. I'd actually preserved it by restoring it to Victorian grandeur while maintaining historic integrity. My renovation had done more for island preservation in 1 year than Linda's harassment campaign had accomplished in 15. As the sun set over Whispering Pines Island, painting my restored Victorian house in golden light, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. Sometimes people confuse control with preservation and harassment with protection. Linda Hayes had tried to preserve island character by destroying the lives of people who could actually restore island heritage. Instead, she'd learned that federal prison doesn't care about community associations, and property rights don't end at the waterline. The house was beautiful, the community was welcoming, and the sunset view from my restored porch was perfect. Linda's criminal campaign had failed completely, but it had succeeded in teaching the island that real preservation requires law-abiding cooperation, not criminal harassment. Federal authority. It reaches every island, protects every property owner, and prosecutes every crime, even when the criminals think water provides immunity from justice.